We must capture a live Earth creature, K9, and take it back with us to Mars. Isn't that a nice assignment?
The power for this mind changer comes from that central electrode. If we can short it out... My pet monster, my very, very bestest friend.
Imagine you're up late at night, about to go to bed, reading a book. The book makes a brief mention of a particular group of experiments. Your interest is piqued, and you do a little digging. And suddenly, you find yourself in a rabbit hole so deep you cannot possibly fathom the bottom. I present to you the Montauk Project. The story you just heard is not like most stories I tell on this channel, because, well, it was my story. I was reading a book detailing the paranormal history of South Carolina, when in the introduction of the book it detailed experiments with telekinesis, time travel, mind control, teleportation, interdimensional travel, among other oddities, all under the name of the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project was based on the accounts of three individuals who were involved with it. Preston Nichols and Alfred Bielek were both researchers, and Stuart Swerdlow was supposedly one of the test subjects. Remember those names for later. The theory was popularized when Nichols wrote a series of books called the Montauk Project in the early 1990s. In fact, the theory even reached the ears of famed UFO researcher Jacques Vallée, who claimed the project involved time travel, aliens, interdimensional travel, mind control, and even the place where the Apollo 11 moon landings was filmed. The Montauk Project also has very close ties with the Philadelphia experiment and the very real MK Ultra and Stargate program. All projects I'll eventually get to on this channel. The project allegedly took place at Camp Hero Air Force Base at Montauk Point on Long Island, New York, only about 120 miles from New York City between 1971 and 1983. Montauk is a relatively small town at the tip of Long Island and is a popular tourist destination for many from New York City, mainly blissfully unaware of the horror that lies only a short drive away. But let's first see where all these crazy experiments allegedly took place. Camp Hero. Camp Hero was first constructed in 1942. The base saw extensive operations throughout World War II. The base would eventually be officially decommissioned in 1981. The base was handed over to the National Park Service, where it was then handed over to the state of New York. Parts of Camp Hero today are now part of Camp Hero State Park, but many parts of the park remain prohibited from entry, such as the iconic radar tower. The Montauk Project allegedly began in 1971 after a former Nazi scientist was moved from the nearby Brookhaven National Laboratories in Long Island, New York, where he supposedly worked for 20 years. It was this scientist who supposedly ran the program called the Montauk Project. The initial, unofficial name for the project was Project Red Hawk. In the beginning, the program focused primarily on the development of electromagnetic technology. The original thought was to control planes, ships, tanks, vehicles, etc. with the mind. The program later developed into mind control at a later date. Preston Nichols claimed that the original electromagnetic technology and the later mind control technology was in fact a mind amplifier. One of the devices used would infamously be called the Montauk chair, and it was used to amplify the psychic abilities of those who sat in it. The machine could see what someone was thinking and display it on a screen, and possibly even manifest it physically. The chair could also implant images or numbers into the heads of those who sat in it, and even create vortexes in time and space. The primary focus for the Montauk chair was a boy named Duncan Cameron. Cameron was a psychic that the chair amplified in many experiments. Cameron was mainly studied when dealing with multiple different realities. One experiment with Cameron was known as the seeing eye, which put an emphasis on finding targets anywhere on the globe. The experiment allowed Cameron to see what the target was seeing, feel what they were feeling, and hear what they were hearing, etc. This was called remote viewing. Another experiment even details the experiment Cameron had when exposed to a simulated nuclear detonation. His psyche expanded, dismantling the protective layers of his mind. His focused awareness became one with the greater field of consciousness, and his awareness became one with his surroundings. The linear sequence of time changed. Space unfolded and events happened synchronously. Cameron was able to establish a fixed time loop between the Philadelphia experiment on August 12, 1943, and the Montauk Project on August 12, 1983. With the creation of the time loop with the Philadelphia experiment, the Montauk Project evolved into the development of a time machine. Aliens also supposedly helped in the creation of this time machine by giving researchers information on how to build it and coordinates in time to where they could travel. Preston Nichols claims that it did work, but not 100% of the time. Ironic, right? But many test subjects were simply lost and never returned from these time travel experiments. But where did they find these subjects? The children experimented on were collectively known as the Montauk Boys. These children would be used in experiments and would be tortured psychologically to break down their minds. Children were specifically targeted and abducted off the streets. Typically, the kinds of children abducted would show signs of being a psychic or were living in terrible situations, i.e. being homeless, running away, having neglectful parents, orphans, etc. Basically, meaning children who would not be reported missing or missed by society. These children were seen as expendable and abducted in droves. Some of these children were below the age of 4. Once being abducted, these children would be psychologically tortured to break down their minds so they could be experimented on. Some of the torture methods used were drowning, where their heads would be placed underwater and lifted right before the child drowned. Other methods include thermal shock therapy, where the body would be exposed to extreme hot and cold air in rapid succession to confuse and disorient the brain. The torture process undergone in the Montauk Project was known as programming. Not only were these kids tortured through the use of traditional torture methods, they were also sexually abused by programmers and researchers, as claimed by Stuart Swerdlow. Stuart Swerdlow claims to have been abducted several times as a teenager and described one ritual once the mind was programmed. The body would become a vessel for some kind of supernatural entity, and Swerdlow claims that the programming process was crucial because the children were innocent and they had extreme fear. As I said, these children were the primary subjects for the experiments carried out under the Montauk Project. Some of the most notable experiments included time travel. Many children were simply lost and were never found after going through stargates in these experiments. Supposedly, aliens helped build these time machines and provided coordinates in time and space for researchers to send these children to. Swerdlow claims that he was sent back to biblical times and many other notable time periods to collect DNA samples of influential historical figures. Many children were killed as a result of these experiments, and their bodies were disposed of in a variety of ways, through cremation, decomposition through lime exposure, or by simply being dumped into the ocean. Once the program was shut down, the remaining children were released, but due to the nature of the programming process and the trauma suffered at Camp Hero, almost all completely forgot their time in the Montauk Project. One alleged Montauk boy, Joe Lafreno, claims that he had his memories repressed, and was upon meeting Preston Nichols in 1994 for a book signing of one of Nichols' books, Lafreno's memories began to return. Altogether, between 10,000 and 100,000, or even upwards of 300,000 children were used as subjects, with less than 1% surviving and being able to function in society afterwards as a result of the Montauk Project. The end of the Montauk Project was largely brought about by one man in particular. The man's name was Jack Pruitt, who was a programmer and supposedly a first lieutenant in charge of Camp Hero. Pruitt then brought more members to his rebellion, such as Alfred Bielek and later Preston Nichols. Pruitt approached Duncan Cameron while using the Montauk chair. Pruitt wanted Cameron to conjure a monster that was scary enough for the higher-ups to shut down the project. The monster conjured was much worse than Pruitt could have hoped for. The monster happened to have manifested as a creature from a movie called Forbidden Planet as the monster from the id. The monster was supposedly large, hairy, and extremely destructive and ate nearly everything in its path. As the chaos ensued, Pruitt ordered Nichols at gunpoint to shut down the machines controlling the Montauk chair. Nichols shut down the machine and the computers and returned the creature back to its original dimension. The Montauk Project could not recover from the incident, and the project was closed in 1983. The Montauk Project happens to be one of the most interesting rabbit holes I've stumbled upon as of late. The government denies all accusations of anything occurring at Camp Hero, and that's exactly what this entire conspiracy theory is: allegations. We all know that not all allegations and conspiracy theories are true, but do I believe in the validity of the theories surrounding the Montauk Project? Not entirely. I do think that something could have happened at Camp Hero. Every subterranean access point has been filled with concrete, and a large amount of the base remains off limits. And we do know of real events similar to the Montauk Project, such as with MK and the Stargate Project. But those projects were focused mainly on testing adult subjects, not children. The public outrage over these projects and testing on unknowing adults was immense, that even if the Montauk Project did happen and tested on children, the public's anger for the government would be immeasurable. But I do think it is important to note that when Nichols, Bielek, and Swerdlow came out with their story, the public had known of MK which had been known about since the early 70s, and the Stargate Project, which was declassified in 1995. Now let's look at the main proponents of this theory: Nichols, Bielek, and Swerdlow one at a time. Let's start with Nichols. Nichols, I feel, provides the most validity to this theory because Nichols understands that eyewitness testimony is one of the most unreliable sources of testimony, and he understands that he may not remember things correctly. So when he came out with new information, he would only release it if it was corroborated by at least 3 individuals. And Preston Nichols believed his story until his death in 2018. The next figure is Alfred Bielek. He claims to have been part of the Philadelphia experiment on board the USS Eldridge in the Montauk Project. Bielek died in 2011 and maintained his story to his death. Now for the main meat and potatoes for this section of the video, Stuart Swerdlow. I left a lot of Swerdlow's testimony out of the main script for this video simply because of how eccentric it is. Some of that testimony includes things like when he was a teenager, he would be abducted from his room by what he thought were to be aliens. He then later discovered that these aliens were actually manufactured by scientists and were actually human fetuses grown to larger sizes and mind-controlled. He also claims that one of the main reasons for the Montauk Project existing in the first place was for the Illuminati to extract a material known as adrenochrome, which is a real chemical, by the way. The Illuminati would then use the adrenochrome as a mood, body, and mind enhancer. In other statements, Swerdlow details the hierarchy and appearance of a caste system of what he calls the Draco Empire, which are apparently reptilian humanoids. Apparently, the Hindu caste system and the Naga creature from Hindu mythology is based on these reptilians that came ashore after their continent sank in the Pacific. He even claims to have had contact with these reptilians in the Montauk Project. Swerdlow also teaches a self-help class with his wife, in which they teach everything I covered in this video, among other things, such as that the chemicals fluoride and chloride in the water system were developed by the Nazis and is used by the Illuminati for mind control. Oh, and by the way, fluoride is actually used to prevent cavities. I personally can attest to this because I grew up without access to fluoride and had a lot of cavities as a kid. As soon as I moved away and had access to fluoride, my teeth immediately improved.
Tap or no tap?
No tap.
Excuse me, what is tap?
Water. They put fluoride in it. Learned it from the Nazis.
Theory is it makes you docile, easy to manipulate.
Oh, I drink tap water.
Yeah, I kind of figured that.
The story of the Montauk Project certainly is an interesting one, and one that has a long rabbit hole. I mean, the story even inspired the Netflix show Stranger Things. But is there any truth behind these extraordinary claims? I don't think so. But as Carl Sagan once said, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And in the words of Preston Nichols, it's up to you whether you're going to believe it or you don't. When asked in an interview with Christopher Garetano, will there be any hard evidence? Nichols replied, I doubt it. Maybe the Montauk Project was real, maybe it wasn't, but whether you read this as science fiction or nonfiction, you are in for an amazing story. This has been yours truly, Alias. Good night.